People ask me sometimes what it felt like to sign the ratification Accords. They want something grand. They imagine I have a speech prepared, something about history and sacrifice and the long work of peace. I tell them the truth, which is that I cried in front of 7 Vthon diplomats and couldn't stop for almost 4 minutes, and that the Vthon were so frightened by it that they nearly adjourned the ceremony entirely. That is the story. It just doesn't go the direction people expect. I was 53 years old when I went to ratification. Not a senior diplomat, I was an attaché, a second-tier presence on a third-tier posting, which is why I was sent at all. The Vthon Collective had spent 11 years refusing contact with anyone carrying a flag above a certain authority threshold. They were meticulous about such things. Their opening transmission had specified the maximum rank of the human delegation with the same precision they applied to atmospheric pressure and acceptable docking vectors. So they got me. Cela Marin, diplomatic attaché, 16 years of quiet service, nobody's idea of a threat. The escort assignment was a formality. Corporal Devin Osai was 26, and he had been seconded from the transit security unit because someone in the logistics chain needed to tick a box. He carried a sidearm he would never use and a tablet loaded with the orbital station's emergency protocols, which he read twice during the passage out of what I can only describe as professional thoroughness. He was not remarkable. I mean that without unkindness. He was steady and competent, and he asked good questions, and he made decent coffee from the transit pack in our shared berth. And by the third day, I had learned that he had a younger sister studying agricultural systems on Caliph, and that he was saving to visit her when his rotation ended. 4 days, that was the length of our transit. The Vthon station, ratification, occupied a stable point above a gas giant the collective called HFY. I had read the briefing packets. I knew what to expect physically: the tessellated hull, the bioluminescent corridor markings, the dry, faintly metallic air that their biology preferred. What the briefing packets could not prepare me for was the silence, not the absence of sound. The Vthon were not a quiet species. Their secondary vocal structures produced a low, continuous harmonic that you felt more than heard. What I mean is the quality of their attention. When the delegation entered the ratification chamber, all 7 of them, primary convener Esath Verak at the center and the 6 subordinate members arrayed behind, they looked at me the way a scientist looks at an instrument reading that doesn't match the expected value. Carefully, without expression. As if something in my presence required accounting for. I had been told this was normal. It was not comforting to be told this. The ratification chamber was a long room with walls of something that looked like frosted mineral glass, lit from within by the Vthon's preferred spectrum, a cool, blue-green ambient that made everything look like it was resting at the bottom of a very calm sea. The table was a single piece of the same material oval, with 7 seats on their side and 1 on mine. I sat alone. I was meant to sit alone. This had been specified in the pre-conference documents as a trust signal, the human delegation stripped to its minimum possible configuration. 1 person, 1 voice. Here is what we are prepared to give. Esath Verak spoke first, in the cooperative standard that the Vthon used for cross-species contact. The phrasing was formal to the point of stiffness, but the content was clear. They were prepared to offer a conditional cessation of hostilities along the HFY perimeter, with a framework for extended negotiation to follow. In exchange, they required a binding ratification from a recognized human authority, carried in person, sealed and witnessed in this chamber. They had chosen the terms carefully. They wanted something that could not be contested, that could not be walked back by a different administration or reframed by a different press corps. They wanted a human sitting in a room with them, looking at them, and signing. I said I was prepared to do that. They produced the documents. I had reviewed the language already. 2 weeks of back-channel work had hammered the text into its final shape before I ever boarded the transit vessel. There was nothing in those pages that surprised me. I uncapped the stylus, and I was reaching for the first page when the aide stepped through the side door. He was a junior member of my own delegation support staff, a young man named Tureth who had been stationed in the outer corridor with the communications equipment. He crossed the room without meeting anyone's eyes and placed a folded slip of hard copy beside my hand. I looked at him. He shook his head very slightly, which told me that whatever was on the paper was not a reason to stop the ceremony. I picked it up and read it. The security breach in Corridor 7 had been contained. One fatality on the human side. Corporal Devin Osai, Transit Security, 26 years old, had died clearing the approach junction 40 minutes before the ceremony began. I set the paper down. I did not cry immediately. There were a few seconds where I was simply still, looking at the document in my hand, and the room was very quiet except for the low harmonic the Vithon produced without effort or intention. Then something in my chest released, and I put my face into my hands and I wept. I'm not describing a polite set of diplomatic tears. I'm describing the kind of grief that has no audience, that doesn't know it is being watched, that comes out of the body the way weather comes out of a change in pressure. I was not in control of it. I was not performing it. I had known Devin Osai for 4 days, and he had made me coffee and told me about his sister, and now he was dead in a corridor 40 minutes away, and my body understood that before my training did. I heard movement from the other side of the table. I lowered my hands. Esath Varak had risen from the chair. So had 2 of the subordinate members. They were not moving toward me, they had stepped back, which I recognized later from the analysis reports, as a Vithon response to an event outside their prepared categories. They had a protocol for human aggression. They had a protocol for human negotiating tactics, for human deception signals, for human requests to delay or reframe. They did not have a protocol for this. I said quietly to Tureth, "Give me a moment." He gave me a moment. I straightened the document. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I picked up the stylus. "I apologize," I said to Esath Varak, and I meant it not as a performance of diplomatic courtesy, but because I understood that I had introduced something into the room that none of them had been prepared for, and I felt genuinely sorry for that. I have just learned that a member of my escort was killed in the security action. He was a good man. I needed a moment. Esath Varak looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then they said, in the careful formal standard that they used for everything, "You will continue." "Yes," I said, "I will continue." And I did. I signed every page. The ceremony completed. The Vithon delegation withdrew in the precise procedural sequence their protocols required, and I sat alone in the blue-green light of that room until Tureth came to collect me. I thought at the time that the incident was a footnote, a human moment in the margin of a larger event. 22 years later, when the Vithon internal correspondence from the Ratification summit was partially declassified as part of the second-generation contact agreement, a researcher at the Institute for Cross-Species Relations sent me a translated excerpt from primary convener Esath Varak's post-session report to the collective's deliberative council. The report covered the treaty terms, the structural integrity of the ratification process, the human delegation's technical compliance, and the security incident. The final notation was 9 lines long. I have read it many times. I have it memorized. It recorded clinically what the delegation had observed, that a human diplomat, upon receiving notification of a colleague's death during an active ratification ceremony, had displayed open grief responses for a duration of approximately 4 minutes, that the colleague had been known to her for a period of 4 transit days, that she had resumed the ceremony without prompting, completed all required procedures, and expressed only a brief and apparently sincere apology for the interruption. The notation did not conclude that humans were dangerous because of their weapons, or their endurance, or their willingness to fight. It concluded that the delegation had not previously understood the operational range of human bonding, that a human could form an attachment in 4 days that produced that quality of grief, and then stand back up and finish the work. Esath Verak's final line, translated directly, reads, "We had not included this variable in our threat assessment. We are including it now." That, I think, is the part that people don't expect when they ask about the Accords. They expect history. They expect the machinery of nations and the long, deliberate calculations of power. They don't expect that what finally moved the Vithan collective to take us seriously was a middle-aged woman crying in a mineral glass room for a corporal she had known 4 days, and then picking up the pen,